This is a man that's been all over the planet carrying the message of 12-step recovery. It's my pleasure to bring you up, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Morning, everybody. My name's Tom. I'm an alcoholic. By the grace of a loving God, I've been continuously sober since June the 15th of 1986. And for that date, I am truly grateful. I have a home group. I'm from Santa Fe, New Mexico. My home group is simply called An AA Group. And gets funnier. We copied that from Don Pritz. He started a group by that name, and it comes from the long form of the third tradition, which states that any two or three gathered for the purpose of sobriety may call themselves an AA group, and so we do. And we meet on Monday nights at the Salvation Army in Santa Fe, and at 7 o'clock, and we're a big book meeting, and if you're ever in Santa Fe, we welcome you with open arms. I hope you come see us. Grateful to be here. What an honor, you know, and especially to be with this distinguished group that I'm with today. I want to thank Jimmy for asking us 3 years in advance. Really? I said, do you know how old I am, dude? Anyway, just saying. And especially Sean for picking us up in Philadelphia at the airport. What a deal to be picked up. When you're not picked up, it can get pretty hairy. So, Sean, thank you. I appreciate it. And a lot of good friends here, too many to shout out to. There's so much on the third step, and when you've been sober and doing this for a while, there's just more to say than you can put into an hour. But what I'd like to do is just talk about my experience, my spiritual journey, how I came to believe, and then what happened as a result of that. You got to kind of qualify, I guess, and I drank for too long, actually. I wished I drank shorter, but because I'd have more to offer you, so it killed a lot of brain cells. But just quickly, I was never going to be a drinker, and I found myself in a situation. I was 22 years old, about to become a father. I never drank up until that point, to speak of. Not like we drink, you know what I mean? I took drugs, but I never drank because I grew up with alcoholism, and I hated the institution of drinking and just everything about it. And I thought people who drank were idiots, frankly. But I was 22 and about to become a father, and I was absolutely scared to death. And, I didn't know that when I went into the chicken box on Nantucket that night and drank that Ballantine Ale and that Tennessee sipping whiskey, that it was going to change my entire life, the whole course of my life. But it did. And the reason that it did was because when I took that drink, it killed the fear. And I've been living in terror for a long time. And I didn't even realize it. I didn't realize how scared I was. I thought my life had ended. Anyway, it's a whole long story that I won't get into, but you can probably relate to that. Polly and I were talking yesterday or day before about, when I first started drinking, it was medicinal. And I missed the party, by the way, and I'm kind of PO'd about that. You know what I mean? You guys had a lot of fun and a lot of partying, not me. I drank for an effect, and the effect was to kill that fear and to let me interface with the planet. And that's the only reason that I drank. And it worked perfectly. And then it did a lot for me in the beginning, and then it took over my entire life and just about destroyed me. So in the beginning, the drinking was about killing the fear. But as I progressed, I started doing things, taking actions that went against my morals and values in every way, shape, and form. And eventually the drinking was to kill the guilt and the shame that I felt for having behaved the way I did. And you've heard that this weekend. I think Rich was talking about that last night. And so in the end, it was just, kind of oblivion drinking. I tried a lot of different ways to get off the booze, and never was able to. And I think it was, I know it was Don that said last night that he eventually gave up trying. You know, there's a thing that happens in alcoholism when it's progressed, you know, towards the end that, at least for people that I know, and this was my case, that when you've tried to quit over and over again and sincerely meant it with everything in you, and then find yourself drinking against your own volition, you know, and regardless of what you have tried, you know, none of that works, then eventually the humiliation of the failure is such that you just say, why put myself through that anymore? You know what I mean? I know I'm going to die some night and this whole horror show will be over, and just hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later, and you give up trying to quit, and that's what happened to me. On the way, I tried a lot of things. I tried some spiritual stuff. I tried therapy. That, you know, you lie to the therapist. You know, you don't never tell the truth to a therapist. I tried a bunch of different stuff. Antabuse. Any Antabusians in the crowd? Not many anymore, huh? Because it kills people. I'll tell you, that's the funkiest drug I ever took was Antabuse, but it did work. Because I took it and I drank and I got violently ill, and I've never found it necessary to take Antabuse again. So that was good. Anyway, so but I'll give you a vision for you, and then we'll get on with the third step. And Rich inspired me with this last night about the drinking and driving. Right? Where we live in New Mexico, it's long distances. The idea of not drinking and driving just never even occurred to me. And I drove in blackouts all the time, and it just seemed natural after a while. I mean, at first it terrified me. My God, I was driving, I wasn't even aware of where I was, you know? And then after a while, it's like, that's just another night. Yeah, it's just Tuesday night or whatever it is. And, but when Juanita and I met, and oh, by the way, it's my wife's birthday today, and she's your Al-Anon speaker. I've got to hurry this up so I don't butt into her time. But at any rate, we had met, and actually we got together 40 years ago this month. And I mean, really got together. We've been together for 40 months. You like that, huh? Okay. And we had met at a wedding and then just hooked up, just immediately. It was just lust at first sight, and we were together. And about 2 or 3 weeks into this kind of bumping into each other, we had a real date, and we were going to go out to see Taj Mahal, and that was her pick, and we were all excited. I was really excited, and I'd been working at a construction job where you could kind of do whatever you wanted, and I did. And so we were doing that white powder outside issue all day and drinking tequila on the job, you know, and then got paid and went to Santa Fe to really drink. And I made a tactical error. I switched to bourbon. I never should have done that. And like so many of the decisions I made that night, it seemed like a good idea to arm wrestle a plumber friend of mine, and he snapped my right arm in half. And God, does that hurt. I'll just tell you, don't do that drunk or sober, because it's just not a good deal. So our first date ended up in the St. Vincent's Hospital instead of out to see Taj Mahal, which was unfortunate. But she was there when I came out of surgery to push that gurney back to the room, you know, and there was my angel, and I knew it was love, right? So, but the driving part was that I would drive her around Santa Fe. I had a 65 six-cylinder Chevy pickup truck, and it had, older people know what a 3 on the tree was. It's a column shifter. If you're not old enough, you don't remember that. Probably don't even remember shifting, most of you, but that's neither here nor there. But they couldn't put a cast on that arm, so they strapped it to my chest, okay, because it was a spiral fracture. You can't cast that up. And so I'm driving with one hand. I've got a Camel cigarette hanging in my mouth, a tall boy between my legs. I've been drinking bourbon, and I'm driving like this, and to shift, I have to let go of the wheel, reach through, column shift, and my babe was right there with me. She thought that was an adventure, I guess, but anyway. So People say, my God, that happened to you, then you must have gotten sober. 9 years later, I got sober because booze was doing something for me. But eventually it beat me into the state of reasonableness that most of us know about. So my journey with God, or the idea of God, it was, I don't know how to put this. I started out, I grew up in a Protestant church, and we were Southern Methodist, and I took to it. I liked that. There was a lot of comfort in that. And I was a Bible student and this and that. Then I hit 14, I hit puberty, there was girls and cigarettes and stuff like that, and I left all that behind. And eventually I hooked up with a bunch of Quakers who were trying to save the world. We traveled around the world trying to do that in this experimental college back in the late 60s. And there was something there was some kind of spirit there, but I saw things out in the world. I was in Africa and villages in Mexico and stuff that made me believe that there couldn't possibly be a God, that the way things were operating on planet Earth, it was impossible for the idea that there was a God. And plus, I put it together that the idea of God, or this concept, was something that rich and powerful people used to control poor and disenfranchised people. You understand? It's like the opiate of the masses, right? That's what I thought. And so I was pretty anti-God, I guess you'd say. And the only time that it ever really came into my my wheelhouse, as they say today, was I would be doing some of those outside issues in a fashion that would deliver it quicker. Let's just put it that way. No drug talk here, you know. Larry Johnson used to say, drugs, we can't talk about them, but you're not sober if you're taking them. So just so you know. Anyway, I would do this outside issue, and my heart would start pounding, and I'd fall to my knees, sure that I was having a heart attack. And at that time, I'd say, God, please don't kill me. I have a little daughter, okay? And that was the only prayer I ever said up until the time I got to you guys. So in this trying to quit entirely or moderate deal, one of the places that you end up is A&A, or at least most of us do. And so Juanita said, get sober or get the hell out of the house, and I don't care which it is. She was rooting for get the hell out, I think. And I had a friend who had he was an architect buddy of mine who had gotten sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, I heard. And I used to drink with this guy, and he was my kind of drinking man. So I called him up in front of her so she could hear the conversation. I said, Jay, you don't drink anymore. Oh, you go to A&A? And I could go with you to one of those classes? Oh, really? And you don't drink? And then I whispered, but you still drink beer, right? The beer isn't drinking, right? He said, no, he didn't drink beer either. Anyway, I went to him with, I went to one of these classes with him. And I called them classes. And I didn't drink before I went because that was the etiquette. I figured there'd be somebody sniffing you at the door or something like that. It was in Santa Fe. And I went down these stairs, and I'm in this crowd of people who I assume are in some cult or some Christian, evangelical kind of a deal. I knew nothing about AA, but I could tell you all about it on a bar stool, right? So, and I don't remember, I went to 2 of these meetings, I don't have any memory of them, except the guy leading the meeting was an old white guy. And he had just gotten back from, old, like 42, right? And he had just gotten back from Europe, and he was so thrilled with his trip to Europe. It was just, had to tell us all about it. And I thought, I'm a white guy, I've been to Europe, it didn't do a damn thing for me, I could care less about your trip to Europe, But I sat there and, sat through the whole thing. And Went to another one and then came home and told Juanita, hey, I went to the classes, I've got it, I'll never drink again. And the reason, what I put together from those two meetings was AA is a punishment. You've led this crappy life, right? And you've developed all this karmic debt. And now the way you're going to pay it off is to sit, well, we heard it last night, it's going to be linoleum floors and folding chairs for the rest of your effing life. And then maybe you will even the score, right? Because this is your penance. And if you're new here, and I know some of you are, I was absolutely wrong. The greatest reward of my entire life has been Alcoholics Anonymous, and I just couldn't be happier to be a member. I just want you to know that. Anyway, so I did stay sober behind that for 67 days, but then I got thirsty and I drank again and went on what I hope will be my last tear. And so I had destroyed my life. My life just was, I had created a storm that I had to get out of, and I won't go into all that, but I had a lot of bad things happening in my hometown that were coming down on me at once. I know some of you, and so what you do is, you hit the road. There's that thing about take a trip, not take a trip. No, always take a trip. Always move it out, right? So I go to the big city, to Albuquerque, to hide out in a treatment center. Now, we were bankrupt, but Juanita worked for the state of New Mexico, and so we had insurance, and I could get into this place. And I went there not to get sober. I knew that was an impossibility. I had deduced that for me to live on planet Earth, on the natch, like absolutely nothing in me is a physical impossibility, because when I'm not drinking and using, things get really ugly quick, okay? That spring tightens up really quick. So that's not happening. And I knew that. And so I just went in there to hide out and let the dust settle so I could come back and face just this mess that I'd made in my hometown. And I'm in that place, and several things happen, and this is where the story really begins. I was sitting in a meeting, some kind of a meeting, and I was in that Hospital Johnny with the butt hanging out deal that we all know and love so well. And but we were in a meeting, and it was not an AA meeting, but in the treatment center. And they just put a bunch of us together, threw in some big books, and said, entertain yourselves, and we'll be back in an hour, that kind of thing. And I don't remember what was said, what we read. I don't remember any of that, because I lost consciousness at one point. And I don't mean that I fell over and fainted, but I just wasn't there for a while. I just went, I was gone. And I don't know where I went, but I did go someplace. And when I was like, whoa, I'm back. Oh, I'm in this room with these people. And what was on my mind was the fact that I had driven in blackouts hundreds of times, and I mean long distances in blackouts, and that nothing horrible had ever happened. I drove my truck into the river one night. I drove off the road constantly. I drove into guardrails and stuff. But I never hit another car. I never killed a family, which was my great, great fear. I think a lot of us have had that fear. And I was terrified of that, and I would remember vaguely bumps in the night, like things I'd driven over, and then go out, cautiously to see if there was blood on the fender, that kind of deal. And that happened over and over and over. And I drove in blackouts with little bitty kids in the back of a pickup truck, across New Mexico, drinking Jack Daniels. And what occurred to me was that I'd known a lot of people who had died in car wrecks. And anyway, and so what occurred to me was, statistically, it was impossible for someone to have driven that many times in that many blackouts and have nothing really horrible happen. I never got a DWI. Nothing ever happened, it was the Wild West back then, but still, people were dying every week. And I suddenly was convicted. I was convinced of the fact that something or someone had been taking care of me, that there was a spirit or God or an angel or something that had been driving that truck, because I would come, the idea of asleep at the wheel, that happened to me constantly. Like you go, oh my God, I must have been sleeping. Oh, we're driving, 85 miles an hour. And so that did something to me. That was kind of like my Bill Wilson white light experience. And it got me ready for something. Well, at any rate, so there was a little, I couldn't sleep. I was detoxing badly. One of the things that I tried besides antabuse was what I call the heroin cure for alcoholism, the heroin maintenance cure. It went sideways. It was a bad deal. I got hooked on heroin. So when I went into that hospital, I'm physically addicted to alcohol and heroin at the same time, which is really ugly, and most people don't survive that. But that was my story. And so I couldn't sleep much. And I was up early, and I'm sitting in the cafeteria of this place, looking out on a patio outdoors in Albuquerque in the summertime in June. And there's a little group of people doing something, and I have no idea what they are. And I'm sitting next to a guy, and I said, what are they doing out there? What is that? He said, oh man, it's some extra thing, some extra AA deal that isn't a part of the program. You don't have to do it. And only the Spanish word that he used is lambe. And none of you know what that means. So it's just a nice translation of that is ass kisser, okay? So he said, only the ass kissers go out there. And I said, oh, well, I'm a lot of things, man, but I'm not an ass kisser. And, and I am, by the way, P.S. But at any rate, so he said, yeah, but you know, they have, you know how we're only drinking decaf in here? And I said, yeah. He said, they have real coffee with caffeine out there, and you can have as much as you want. And I thought, I believe I will do that. I'm at like day 5 or 6 without anything in me, and you know, I would like even a cheap caffeine buzz at this point. And so I go out for the coffee, and when I got there, they had changed AA. This is my first God shot that I can remember. When I went to the AA meetings in Santa Fe, the thing that bothered me so much was there were all white faces there. There were all white faces. There were, and we live in a town at that point, it was about 60% Hispanic, and none of them were there. And I had this deal going where I'm married to a Chicana, right? And I hang out with Chicanos all the time. I mean, those are my running partners. And in the summertime, I get kind of dark when I'm working outside doing construction, and I speak Spanish. And so people would think that I was half what we call Anglo and half Hispanic, and they call that coyote where we live. And they'd say to me, so you're coyote, right? And I'd go, yes, I'm coyote, you know. Total bullshit. I'm a white boy from Kentucky, okay? Just saying. But I hate me, and I hate being who I am, and I want an alter ego. I want to be something other than I am. So when I get to those first meetings, I'm highly disturbed by the fact that there's no brown faces in there, okay? It's like, where's the raza? Where are the Chicanos? You know, where are the natives? The skins, we called them then. You know, where are the skins? And they weren't there, and that bothered me. But I get to this little meeting to drink the coffee, and there's 2 gnarly Chicano dudes that God sent me, and I'm convinced of it. You may not be, but I am. And they're sitting there running the show there and telling their stories. And I just, you know, I just fell in love with these 2 guys. They just captured me, you know. They lit a fire for me for Alcoholics Anonymous. And really with their wild stories and the fact that they were sober, you know, after they had lived this kind of a life that they'd lived. And so that was the first thing. And I started going there every day, and I said I was going for the coffee, but really I was going for the stories, because it was entertainment like I hadn't had in a long time. 6:45 in the morning, and they're sitting out there telling these stories, and they're laughing. They're going, ah, ha, 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 ha. And I'm thinking, oh my God, man, that story was not funny. You don't, in my world, you don't tell that in front of strangers at all, man, but they did. They seemed to enjoy it. So here's God shot number 2. They also cross-talked a lot, okay? They believed in it, and you could ask questions. I mean, it was just, you know, the Wild West. And one morning, James, the guy who was the secretary, looked across at the newbies, at the guys from the treatment center who had come in there, and he pointed his finger Oh my God, He pointed his finger and he goes, "You people need to find a higher power that you can do business with." Whoa. I had no idea what that meant. You know what I'm saying? And what I learned was exactly what we've already been talking about this weekend, that what he was telling me was what Ebby Thatcher told Bill, okay? Why don't you choose your own conception? Conception is an interesting word, isn't it? You hear people say, my concept of God, but that's not what the big book says. It says conception, which is malleable and can grow and should grow, Concept's kind of in stone, but conception is a working deal. So he said, you people need to find a higher power you can do business with. And that got my attention. Not that I knew what he meant, but it did get my attention and I heard it. So a little bit later, one day, just because I was curious about these two guys, Reuben and James, I asked them independently of each other, how do guys like you stay sober? And they both told me the same story. And what they said was, we pray to God in the morning and and ask God to keep us sober. And at night, if we're sober, and they put more emphasis on this, they said, we thank God for our sobriety, And I thought, oh my God, you are so deluded. Are you kidding? Like, I'm a realist here. You know what I mean? Like, I've traveled the world. I've seen the ugliness of this planet. And there's a God? I mean, are you... And I put it together that they were probably psyching themselves out somehow. I know they're deluding themselves. But then I looked at it, James was 2 years sober. Reuben was 6 years sober. I was like 6 days sober. They had lives that seemed to have meaning and purpose, and mine was in the toilet. And so I thought, well, you're 38 years old, your liver's shot, you've got this weird hepatitis that they don't know what it is, and we do now, it's hepatitis C. And you're 130 pounds, 6 feet tall, you are totally bankrupt, your wife hates you and your children are terrified of you. Maybe they've got something more going on than you do, because you're obviously completely out of game. And how could it hurt you to try to psych yourself into the same situation they're in? And so I started this thing. I started praying at night, and I said, God, thank you for my sobriety, the greatest gift I've ever been given. And I kept doing it. After about 5 or 6 evenings of doing that, I felt a comfort come over me as a result of saying that prayer. And I kept it up for the entire time I was in there, and I got out 33 days after I went in, and I looked at my track record, and I've been saying this prayer every night, and now I'm 33 days sober, and in my personal best in 16 years of drinking and using was 8 days on the natch, with my whole family rooting for me to take a drink, because I was such an insufferable a-hole when I'm not drinking, that, you know what I mean. And anyway, so that got me started, and I've got to do this pretty quickly because it's my wife's birthday, so I don't want to, bump into her time here. That would be awful. She'd forgive me, but it might take a while. Anyway, so a lot happened in the next 5 years, and it was not step work, I'll tell you that. I became a meeting makers make it guy. I went to a meeting every day for 2 years because I was scared to death I was going to drink. And all I knew was AA meetings. And I had some funky sponsorship. And luckily I met a woman along the way who seemed to know what she was talking about. And she just was clear. Don Pritz was my sponsor, and he said, when you speak at meetings, speak clearly. Like, don't just, ramble on and on. Like, know what you're going to say it succinctly, because somebody's life might depend on hearing what you're going to say. He also said this, that I don't think I've ever said this, but he told me this. He said, you should listen very carefully to what's said at AA meetings. But you should listen even more carefully to what you say at an AA meeting, because that's important information for you, and that's probably what you need to hear. Anyway, so I kind of played with AA. It was kind of an as Tom sees it. A lot of great things happened. Some bad depression happened during that time. but it was not a step working time. I had not been exposed to the outline in our big book per se. That was not popular in the town that I was in. But I met this woman. Her name is Mary Thayer, and some of you all know her. And she became my sponsor for 7 years until she fired me for not getting a man like I told her I would when she took me on. But that's, because she was a woman of integrity. But she said something to me. She told me all sorts of great stuff. And we were talking about the late, great Hugh Douglas last night. And I grew up listening to Hugh Douglas-isms, coming out of her. But she said this thing to me that I didn't understand at the time, as so many of the things that I've heard over the years. But looking back, in hindsight, it makes absolute sense. She said, you're going to find as you go through this journey that there are 2 surrenders. That the first one is to booze, okay? That it's beat you, and you can't beat it. And I had that in spades. I got that. She said, and the second one is to self. And I went, oh, yeah, that's cool, I didn't know what she was talking about. In hindsight, this is what happened. I knew I needed God. I knew I needed prayer in order to stay sober. But as so many of us, and I'm sure a lot of you, I thought if I just plant my butt in AA meetings, I can run the rest of my life successfully. I was told I had a high IQ as a child and blah, blah, and it was probably the bourbon for breakfast that was messing that up. So we get rid of that and things are gonna go groovy, And they didn't. They weren't. Things were popping up. Those bedevilments on page 52, my life I looked like a poster boy for that stuff. And here I am sober for years now, and it's not great. And so what has occurred to me, and what occurred to me at one point, was that I needed God in every department of my life. And there was no department that I could set aside and say, Tom will fix this, or my intellect will take care of that. It had to be spirit all the way down the line. The first 3rd step I ever did, I did in that treatment center, I'm sure. I don't remember it. I don't remember much of what went on there. I remember my 5th step that I did in there because I did it with this guy, Reuben. But I don't remember that 3rd step. And what happened was when I hit this wall at 5.5, 6 years sober, and I met a guy that said I was an untreated alcoholic, and I ought to submit to the process that's outlined in the big book, make myself available to that material just as it is, and don't get creative with it, and that I could recover from alcoholism if I did that. Then I was willing at that point to do it, because they say life on life's terms. I don't think life makes terms personally. I think it's just life. But Tom, on Tom's terms that I was making, had beat me up to the point where I was now more open-minded than I had been, let's just put it that way. And I took the steps as outlined in the book, put myself into the book, and did it precisely as it said in the big book, and everything changed. Just like I didn't know that drink of bourbon and that Ballantine ale were going to change my life forever, I didn't know that working the steps as outlined in the big book was going to change my life forever, but it did. It completely was a game changer. So that time when I took the 3rd step, it was with a lot more conviction, okay, a whole lot more conviction. The book had said we do this with our wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor. Juanita told me I'm all 3, so we did it together. And I don't know if I'd ever done it like that before. I don't think I had, but we got on our knees and we held hands and we said that prayer that means so much to me today. And I don't know how many times I've said that prayer with guys and held hands and knelt and done that, but hundreds, let's just say that. And I've done it many different ways, many different places, and it means a lot to me. But I think that the decision is there's more to it than that. Let me say this, because I didn't want to miss this. When we're new and we hit that 2nd step and it says came to believe, how would you come to believe if you were 3 or 4 days sober? Truly, in the sense of the wording of that step. I think, and in my case, it was hope to believe. I hope to believe that there's something, that's going to help me out. That's why I said those prayers that James and Reuben had said. man, I hope there's something. I hope something's going to happen better than what I've got. And then I took action, I had an experience, and now I have some conviction behind it. Now I know something. Now I believe. I don't just believe, now I know, okay? I was, I don't want to miss this either. I was 2.5 years sober, and I was doing a job, and it was a roofing job. And I had left for lunch. I'm a general contractor, and I came back, and my guys on my crew had cut a skylight hole in the roof in the wrong place on a multi-million-dollar house in Santa Fe that an attorney in AA owned and that I was working for. And I went insane. I'd never had a panic attack. I'd heard about them. I had one then. I started hyperventilating. My mind started racing. It was, running me down like I can't even tell you. It was saying, look what you've done. You've destroyed this house. You're a complete idiot. You've done this for 20 years. You still don't know what you're doing. This guy's going to sue you. He's going to take everything you have, but why does it matter? You don't have anything anyway because you're such a loser. On and on and on, and it wouldn't stop. I mean, usually, you have a run like that, and then it quits, but it would not stop. And I got in my truck, and I'm driving away. I had to get out of it. You always move it out, so I'm on my way out, and hyperventilating, and it's increasing in volume, and I just can't stop it. And my mind told me at that point, said, you're about to have a psychotic break. You've heard of them, and now you're in the midst of one. You're going to go absolutely crazy, And back in the day, I won't get heavy into this, but I, as Bill Wilson, like to experiment with LSD, and seeking a spiritual experience of some sort. And sometimes it would go sideways, and you'd feel like you were grappling with it for your very sanity, okay? Some of you know what I'm talking about? Just trust me if you don't. And that's how it felt. It felt like, man, I've got to hold on, because I'm going to end up in Las Vegas, New Mexico in the nut house for the rest of my life. And that's what the voice was telling me. And then the voice said, if you don't get some bourbon whiskey in you to stop this right now, I mean instantly, you're going to go crazy and be insane for the rest of your life. You're just going to have a psychotic break. And I believed it. And at one point I thought, well, wait a minute, I'll lose my sobriety. And the voice said, would you rather you lose your sanity? It's like, you take care of business. And I started praying, and my prayer was, God, please help me. God, please help me. And I meant, get me to the El Toro liquor store so I can get 2 shots of bourbon in me to stop what's going on, to stop this. And if I can get sober later, great. But anything is better than living in the nut house for the rest of my life. And I prayed it, and I prayed it, and what happened was my truck just went past the liquor store. And I pulled over and just wept on the side of the road there, But when I look back on that I started to believe more. I had an experience, a direct experience with that power, and I couldn't deny it. So when I took that third step with Juanita that time, it meant a lot to me. I was hoping that there was a lot more God on board, and as things progressed in my sober life, as I stayed sober, as I watch guys that I work with stay sober, and their lives change. I mean, there's certain stuff that's just absolutely undeniable, that you cannot deny. And so rather than hope to believe, I came to believe because of direct experience. I've been hearing this a lot, and we were out in Sedona about 3 weeks ago, a bunch of us, maybe a month ago. And we were talking about that this program it's not intellectual. You can't learn it. You can't read the big book and study it and memorize it to the point where you'll recover from alcoholism. It's all about action. It's all about experience. That's what it is. I have an opinion, then I have an experience, and then a lot of times I change my opinion. So I'm having more and more of these opinions, and my faith and my belief and my understanding is starting to solidify. Now, the reason that I reacted so adversely when these guys said God and they prayed to God My conception up to that point was what I thought everybody thought God was, which is an old Caucasian guy with a long beard sitting on a cloud with a scorebook keeping score. And he's got a lot of black marks against me, okay? And occasionally he throws thunderbolts. And he's been messing with me all my life. That was about as good as I had going. And eventually that changed, as it should. That conception grew, and it changed and it expanded. I wanted to read from the book, but most of you have page 60 through 63, and it says, "Selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of my problem, and that I want God to relieve me of the bondage of self." And I just have thought that means different things at different times, but what it means is that I'm so full of me that I'm blocked from spirit, okay? I'm so full of me and my intellect and what it's telling me and all the things that are rattling in that I can't connect with my own spirit. Don said it last night, that we found the great reality, capital G, capital R, deep within us. And in the final analysis, it was only there it could be found, okay? But I'm blocked from that if I'm so full of me, and that's what I'm bonded with, bound up with. So that's what needs relieving. So that's what I'm going to make a decision to do. So I'm of the school that we work the steps and rework the steps and rework the steps and rework the steps. That it really is a design for living. That the 12 steps are the design for living. And it's not 1 or 2 or 3 trips through the daisies, it's over and over and over. And as I've taken the third step, it has meant more and more each time. Some people say you only do it once, that's all you have to do. That's not my experience. My experience is I do it over and over, and it goes deeper every time. And it reminds me of what's real, okay, of the truth. When we were out in Sedona, I made a pact with a gal out there. She was the wife of our host out there. I had heard a woman speak this summer, and she said that in the beginning of her sobriety, and this is important, so listen to this, that she kept a journal of all the God shots that happened along the path, the things that happened, okay? Write them down, she said. And she did. And the importance of that was then when life weighs you down, or you weigh yourself down as you interact with life, and you think, God who, or there is no God, or all of those things that happened were just coincidences anyway, you can open that journal and read that stuff and go, oh yeah, now I remember, now I'm reconnected, okay? And I wished I'd done that in the very beginning. So she and I have been collaborating on this thing where we remember those God shots, and now we're writing them down, and we call it evidence, okay? Evidence. And man, it's been great for me. I mean, I had no idea how good that was going to be for me, but we're doing that. And just all of these things have come up. You know, I heard a guy say that the ego will take a valid experience with the power of God and convince you that it didn't happen or that it's meaningless, you know, and it doesn't exist. And so that's you know what I'm doing with this book, and it's just phenomenal, all the things that have happened. One of the things that came up was I was in Russia for Alcoholics Anonymous. I went over there with a guy. It'll be 4 years ago this May, and we did the traditions in Moscow, and then we went to Siberia, like way into Siberia. To do the steps, different places. And P.S., they had us speak every time we were awake, it seemed like. I always say they worked us like Russian immigrants, you know. And, but at any rate, we got to this town, Chita, which is way out in Siberia. It's 300 miles from China. It's 100 miles from Mongolia. And they wanted us to speak to a group of Russian like authorities, you know, like different officials, I guess. And there were 6 of them, and there was a warden of a prison, there was a jail warden, a social worker, a therapist. I can't remember what they were all women though. And they had all come out of the communist era and the bureaucratic Russian era and everything. And so they had questions for us. There was JR and myself, and the first one was, how do you think AA will work here in Russia in our penal system, in our correctional system? Well, I'd been around Don P enough to know that that's a loaded question. There's not a right answer. So the right answer is, I don't know how that would work. I've only been in Russia for a short time, but I do know that it's worked very well in the United States. And so there's probably a good chance it'll work well in Russia. So they kind of accepted that. But then this one woman, and they were, you could tell by their faces, they were kind of adversarial. This is all being translated. And they said, well, we've heard this AA thing is a religion, and you talk about God. And we want to know about that. What is this? Is it a religion? And so, you've never been asked this question. You're in Russia. It's going to be translated. You don't know what the hell to say. I always pray, and I did. And what came out was this, and I find it very interesting. I said, first of all, we're not a religion. AA is not a religion. We're a spiritual program, and we do say God a lot. But when we say God, we have a book that says deep down in every one of us is the fundamental idea of God, okay? And what we mean by that is, I said, if you ever look at a gorgeous, like the sunrise this morning over the water, a bunch of us have been up and saw that, and it just makes your heart sing, I said, like that kind of a feeling, or a beautiful flower that you see and you're just moved by it, or the love that you feel for your children that's like no love on earth, That's what we're talking about when we say God. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. And I said, I know, that you can't see this thing that we call God, that it's not something in front of your face. But I said, if you look out that window, and I'm thinking to myself, why are you saying this? I said, if you look out that window and you see the leaves on that tree moving, and all 6 of their heads look out the window, and I said, you can't see the wind per se, but you see those leaves moving, and you cannot deny that power that is the wind is moving those leaves, and they're all nodding their heads, right? I said, well, we in Alcoholics Anonymous know hundreds of thousands of people who were just on death's door, who shouldn't have made it, like myself, who now are sober and living useful lives, and they say that they depend on this power. And so we know that power is real. And they kind of got that, they kind of got it. And I put a zinger in there just to kind of close the deal. I said, the psychiatric godfather of Alcoholics Anonymous was a man named Carl Jung, and their heads popped up. I'm starting to get some street cred just by mentioning Jung. And I said, I saw a interview with him that happened back right shortly before he died, and they said, Dr. Jung, you say that or one would surmise from the things that you have said and written that you, a man of science, believe in God, okay? Jung's smoking a pipe, if you've ever seen this video. And he says, belief in God. No, I do not believe in God. I know God. There is a difference. And that kind of sealed the deal with these gals. It's like, oh, and they were all nodding their head like, if Carl Jung said it, it's got to be the stuff. And then I ended it with, JR and I just want you to know, are just so incredibly in awe of the just awesome beauty of the Russian women. And they all started giggling, and they weren't that awesome. I'm just telling you, but anyway. So, but anyway, we have a lot of fun with it. So, yeah, I think I'm doing okay. Today, when I do a third step, it's different, and I'll tell you how it's different. When I said I'm going to completely abandon myself to this power, and I said the third step prayer, and I said, take all of me, and I'm giving you my will and my life, I didn't really mean it. I thought I did, but I didn't really mean it. I was always holding back. I always had something that I was holding back. And now, when I take the third step, what I want to do is take the entire package of my life, every compartment of it. I want to take my money. I want to take my possessions, my houses. I want to take my vehicles. I want to take my children, my wife, my grandchildren. That's a tough one. I want to take my health. And I want to take my very life, and I want to put all of that on the altar and say, I'm all in. I'm all in. I'm not holding anything back. I'm not holding anything back. I've only told this story one other time, and it's been coming up, and so I will tell it because it's been important for me. We read the promises. Rogan read the promises of the third step, which were fantastic. And when we were in Siberia, JR and I, we were traveling to one of the towns, and it was an 8-hour trip in a car with a crazy man on snowbound roads by Lake Baikal, which is one of the largest lakes in the entire world. And he's driving like a maniac, and there are these two Russian women in the back seat with JR, and I'm in the front seat with him. And the snow is coming down, the roads are snow-packed, we're hitting these potholes which just send his car, careening. And he's passing these big Chinese logging trucks, just at super speeds with cars coming at us. And I know if he hits the brakes, we're going off the road. And there's forest on either side of us. And I thought to myself, my God, man, I could die here. I really could. This is not just kidding around. You ever have those times like, well, I guess this is where it ends. We've all had those, and that's where I was. And the girls in the back are laughing at this guy when he hits potholes and slides, and they're going, cowboy, we call him cowboy. He's the cowboy. I'm thinking the cowboy's going to kill me, man. And so anyway, a calm came over me. It really did. And I thought, I don't really have any unfinished business here. I've made my amends, There's probably more I need to make, but I'm not aware of them. And, I'm doing something for AA. I think that my life is pretty well intact. I think I've cleaned it up. I'm really ready to go if this is it, And I'm not afraid of where I'm going to go on that next journey. I really am not. Chuck C. used to call it stepping into the next room. And this calm just descended on me, and I thought, my God, that promise has come true. That I'm not afraid of the hereafter. I'm truly not. And what a deal! I'd never ever felt like that. What a deal to get to that place. I know I'm actually going to finish early, if you can imagine. My wife won't believe it. This is your birthday present. Because typically, I have a lot to say, and typically I go over, but I'm not going to go over today. But I know we're going to close with the Lord's Prayer, and I love that. But if you would humor me, any who want to and who know this prayer, my home group in Santa Fe, the NAA group, we always close with the third step prayer. And it's powerful when a lot of people say it together. And so if you'd humor me, I'd like to close my part of this with the third step prayer, okay? I'm not done yet. It goes like this. God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. No amen, because then at once we need to get into action. And Sheldon's going to tell you all about that. Thanks for having us. I love you guys.